For the second consecutive day, Ian Anderson has been grilled by leading QCs. This time it was Clive Stern, counsel for the Department of Mineral Resources. The court has heard Mr Anderson rubber-stamped a lease application in 1992 to mine near Gretley, even though it involved the abandoned Young Wallsend colliery and therefore posed a safety risk. Asked why he didn't thoroughly investigate the application, Mr Anderson replied, "I didn't think I needed to. I didn't think it was a safety matter." The inquiry has been told even though Mr Anderson is critical of the systems within the Department of Mineral Resources and the lack of thorough reviews, he doesn't feel he is guilty of the same offence. In reply, Mr Anderson said this is a different matter. The court has also heard today Mr Anderson wasn't aware of the old workings or their potential risk, even though he had visited the Gretley mine several times and was involved with an application to mine the area where the tragedy occurred. Jenny Crouch, NBN News.
A welcome sight at Knights training this afternoon. The Johns brothers back in action with the top grade and ready for the weekend's battle against Souths. Matthew has recovered from his thigh injury. He starts Sunday's game at 5/8, while Andrew's ankle complaint has healed and he'll start from the bench. The star halfback will play
for a short period.
He may not be giving too much away on the tactics front, but the coach freely admits the Knights' last game was one he'd rather forget.
I've been looking for excuses. There's not many I can make.
Newcastle is red-hot favourite to turn the form around against the Rabbitohs and really says players will have to improve to keep their positions.
They must do, otherwise, Ash will promote people and change things around.
Robbie O'Davis has been named in the team, although the fullback is in doubt with a thigh injury. Mark Hughes is on standby, while in a change in the forwards, Bill Peden drops to the bench, allowing Harrigan to start the match.
But naturally, with the speed of the game, there'll be plenty of interchanges, so the forwards will rotate it fairly regularly.
Newcastle Council signalled its intentions this morning with a half-page ad in the local press spelling out the city's financial position. Ratepayers were warned the strategy of selling off assets and digging into savings to make up for shortfalls in rates and government grants can no longer be sustained.
That's really the bottom line and the major challenge that's facing us in our upcoming budget to turn that around.
The council is looking at a three-pronged strategy to address its financial woes. Firstly, it will lobby the state government for more money. Secondly, it will ask ratepayers to shoulder more of the burden, with the council sure to ask the government to increase rates by more than the 3.1% limit.
We certainly will be asking to go above that. I can't say how much.
The Mayor has also foreshadowed major spending cuts, which in turn will likely lead to staff cuts.
If they can't be redeployed, we now have to look at the situation of redundancy for positions like that. So that is something that we're looking at.
The council will release details of its draft budget on Friday. The public will then have 28 days to make their feelings known. Meanwhile, the Port Stephens Council has released its draft budget, proposing a 6.4% rate rise, which would add about $40 to the average bill. Phil Hind, NBN News. With smoking and alcohol-related diseases among Australia's biggest killers, pubs and clubs are now at the sharp end of health education. A survey in The Hunter shows that since January last year, almost 70% of licensed premises have introduced policies on the responsible service of alcohol, while 25% have introduced smoke-free areas.
There's a lot more room to improve, but the speed at which they're adopting these practices is very heartening.
The region's pubs have welcomed the government's new passive smoking legislation, mainly because it will finally set standards for clean air for them to aim at.
We've moved towards that already. What's been lacking is an Australian standard, knowing whether we meet that standard. So we certainly look forward to the Australian standard being set.
Registered clubs have also backed the legislation. Most already boast smoke-free areas, but the legislation will do away with the legal minefield associated with passive smoking.
We've got to see that things are done so that we are not going to be, in court answering to all sorts of legal charges and so on.
The health survey didn't just look at drinking and smoking. It also found more than half the region's licensed premises now offer patrons healthy food alternatives. Phil Hind, NBN News.
Norman Glenn and Rod Bain want to establish a chapel and crematorium within the existing Art Gallery 460 and Sculpture Park Centre on Avoca Drive. They say a city with a population of 180,000 deserves its own crematorium, and they feel the Sculpture Park is an ideal location.
We've spent 20 years landscaping the property, and it would be a shame if Council couldn't see that this is an amenity that the city needs.
The developers claim the crematorium won't represent an environmental risk. However, local residents don't agree. They're concerned about the effect on local waterways, traffic, land values, and they feel the proposal doesn't mix with the rural nature of the area.
It's quite obvious that they've got no respect for the community, they've got no respect for the council, and they've got no respect for the neighbours.
I think the combination of art, tourism, cremation and medicine is a bizarre alliance.
Gosford Mayor Tony Sansom has this week appealed to the developers to withdraw their application. The issue is likely to go before a full council meeting within the month. Jenny Crouch, NBN News.
It was the Little Australians' chance to hit back at the Big Australians' decision to end steelmaking in Newcastle. Around 200 workers facing the axe were joined by community leaders united in condemning BHP's move.
When the tariffs come down, when the bounties come blown away, what do we have? Management can't cope with competition.
Unfortunately, there are many Western countries where it's also not about people, but the almighty dollar.
Shadow Industry Minister Simon Crean addressed the meeting. He's calling on the federal government to introduce a steel plan for the continuing production of steel in Newcastle and across Australia.
The simple fact of the matter is BHP will invest somewhere and there will be growth in steel making around the world. The real issue for Australia is, can we get a slice of that action? And unless we've got a strategy to secure it, we will miss out.
A notable absence from tonight's meeting was Federal Industry Minister John Moore. His decision to attend a black tie function for the opening of the Melbourne casino instead of addressing BHP workers and their future was described by some as a farce.
It goes to show how little regard he's got for support for manufacturing industry, for Newcastle and the people that live and work here.
A national strike involving over 25,000 steel workers will begin the industrial campaign next Thursday. Blake Doyle, NBN News, late edition.
The mountainous seas had lost little of their rage today after doing battle with Newcastle's coastline overnight. Local beaches have been lashed by gale force winds and waves bigger than 11 metres high, causing extensive damage to dunes and surf life-saving clubs. Cooks Hill Surf Club was the worst hit, the barrage of water leaving behind a thick carpet of sand throughout the building. The Newcastle Ocean baths overflowed. The turbulent swell ripped up part of the paving, washing sand up to the doorways on the esplanade. Adding to the environmental problems, a burst pipe spewing thousands of litres of raw sewage straight into the ocean at Stockton Beach.
Never seen this happen before, ever. I think it's mainly from the beach erosion.
The local clubhouse and foreshore were also damaged in the storm.
I've been here on and off now for 12 years and yesterday was by far the biggest seas that I've ever seen in Stockton area.
Up to 1 metre of sand at Fingal Bay was swept away by the surf, with much of it dumped onto the nearby clubhouse. Meanwhile, heavy rains caused havoc on local roads. Inundated by water, Industrial Drive was blocked off for much of the day, with the wet weather causing a number of minor prangs. Many sporting fields and low-lying paddocks were flooded for as far as the eye could see. Lake Macquarie also failed to escape the fury, with a number of boats dragged from their moorings and washed ashore. Since Friday, Newcastle has been pelted by huge seas and heavy rains, with more than 75 millimetres recorded. Although the sky began clearing at around 1 today, the weather forecast says the rain could continue through tomorrow. Simone Cobb, NBN News. In January and March of this year, the Capral aluminium smelter consistently breached its pollution levels. Alarmed, residents notified the EPA and demanded action.
This plant is failing in its duty in trying to keep the environment clean.
According to them, the high fluoride emissions have been creating health problems.
We're seeing it in children being taken by their mothers to Curry Hospital, and the nurses are saying things like, "Oh, not another one with respiratory problems."
Capral blames the breaches on a 24-hour workers' strike in January. General Manager Alex Stitt says the plant was left to run itself, causing higher emissions which took many weeks to right. But employees in the Australian Workers' Union deny that, saying the strike was only one contributing factor.
We want to be responsible corporate citizens and we don't want to see this thing happen. We are quite desperate and determined to get this under control.
The EPA is investigating the breaches and may take legal action, with the possibility of a Tier 1 prosecution being launched.
The penalty provisions for Tier 1 offences are a maximum of $1 million and up to 7 years in jail.
Capral says it's spending millions of dollars to solve its pollution problems within 2 years. Simone Cobb, NBN News.
Staff at the Commonwealth Bank at Cardiff were the latest to fall victim to the armed robber. Just after 12:30 yesterday, he stormed into the main road bank, leaping over the counter, swearing and screaming for money. He fled in a white Ford Falcon, stolen from a nearby Toyota dealership, a pattern that's occurred in 8 robberies over the past 6 months.
He takes a motor vehicle from a car yard adjacent or close to the vicinity. That vehicle, in most cases, has been discovered or located shortly after the offence.
It's led police to believe the same man is responsible for the raids. Late last year, Westpac and Commonwealth banks were robbed in the city. Swansea and Tweed Heads were hit in January. Since then, a hold-up has taken place each month in Newcastle. Today, police released this photograph, taken at the Mayfield Commonwealth Bank in April. He's described as medium height, with an average build and dark hair. In yesterday's robbery, he was dressed in black and was disguised with a balaclava. Each time he's been armed with a handgun, and although no one has been hurt in the raids, police say he's dangerous.
Of course, yes, anyone that enters a bank armed with a firearm must be considered dangerous.
Sarah Griffiths, NBN News.
There's been widespread criticism of the state government's decision to increase poker machine taxes to 30% from September. The 3 major clubs on the Central Coast, Mingara, Central Coast Leagues and the Ettalong War Memorial Club, are now all reconsidering their development plans. Mingara alone was planning to spend $22 million on a motel and conference centre.
We're saying that if the tax is imposed as they suggest, that we will not be able to go ahead with it. We won't have the financial resources to do it.
That development would provide more than 200 jobs and greatly boost tourism. The local clubs also contribute $3 million a year to sporting and community groups. They say that funding now just won't be possible. John Osborne feels the tax will have a greater impact on areas like the Central Coast than bigger regions.
Each of the clubs is proposing to do major expansion. Each club is looking at a new hotel development over the next couple of years. All have indicated that that's probably stopped now because of the increase. There's potentially 500 jobs that will be lost to the region.
As part of his campaign to overturn the tax, John Osborne has today brought together more than 200 of his staff to discuss the effect of the tax. He remains confident it will be overturned. Jenny Crouch, NBN News. The woman in her late 30s was having a bath in the early hours of this morning after painting inside her house when the blaze broke out. Neighbours heard screams for help as the woman struggled to escape the inferno.
I went out my backyard, I saw Chris's house on fire. My husband and I raced out, he raced around the side there because we thought she was still in there. All he can hear was her screaming, and the man over the road pulled her out, and that was it.
Brigades rushed to the Hazel Close house, but they were unable to save the 2-bedroom fibro and iron construction. Today, neighbours sifted through the few remains. The woman was treated at the scene by ambulance officers for smoke inhalation. She's now been released from hospital in a stable condition.
She's very shaken up, She can't talk on the telephone. She's very distraught about her animals at the moment, her 2 dogs and her cat. Very worried about, not so much, she is worried about the house, but mostly animals, and she's very lucky to be alive.
There were also fears of an explosion with the woman's car run on LP gas. The blaze isn't being treated as suspicious. A potbelly stove is believed to have sparked the fire. Jenny Crouch, NBN News. A Emergency services were called out across the weekend, with a large section of the coast affected by gale force winds and torrential rain. Crews rushed to properties from the entrance to Pearl Beach. Those most affected surrounded the lagoons at Wombrel, Terrigal and Avoca. Council bulldozers were used to open the mouths of the lagoons to reduce the threat of flooding.
Most of the time we were more or less flat out trying to keep up with the work, and some of the jobs, very long jobs, made more difficult by the constant rain and winds blowing at the same time.
All up, SES volunteers attended more than 155 jobs. One of the worst casualties was a holiday house at Chittaway Bay. It lost its roof. Late today, insurance assessors were determining the extent of the damage.
Well, the wind was that bad, and I'm living 2 doors down, and I was looking out the side window, and the next thing, all of a sudden, the wind just got hold of the roof and just lifted it straight off the whole poles. The whole lot went.
I love that house. I love the area. And I feel absolutely lost. That's the only word I can think of, coming up here and I haven't got a home.
Crews will continue to monitor the situation over the next few days. Jenny Crouch, NBN News. Emergency. Today's meeting was the first in a series to be held across the country. It comes just weeks before the Howard government votes on the issue. Growers fear imported chicken will devastate the $1.7 billion industry and risk 16,000 jobs, our native wildlife and food safety.
We have in Canberra a government that is obsessed with free trade and is putting the interests of that ideology before the interests of Australian jobs and the Australian environment.
A Senate inquiry has recently investigated a number of health and environmental risks of imported chicken. Growers are hoping the federal government will take these concerns on board.
Not to take risks, not to take risks both with disease and with wildlife and public health, and also not to take risks with what we believe is a very important Australian industry.
The federal government has recently banned salmon imports from North America and apples from New Zealand, and chicken growers are questioning why they're being treated differently. Jenny Crouch, NBN News.
It could be the stuff nightmares are made of, a small band of miners heading into a pitch-black pit filled with deadly gases and any number of unseen hazards. But highly trained and regimented, trusting one another with their lives, the rescue squad heads down to save others.
It has focused them to say, yes, rescue does occur. Normally we don't have rescues very often, and when it does occur, this has brought it back to say that's what my training's for.
A network of underground tunnels at the Argenton Mine Rescue Station, considered the best of its type in the world, gives spectators a simulated version of life underground. While the injuries and rescues are also simulated, the judging of teams in this annual competition is serious. The practice and recent memory of disaster invaluable.
It's an unfortunate outcome of a disaster like that, but people are more interested. They're intrigued to see what actually happens with rescue teams and what they do. So the interest has been lifted over the last 12 months.
And the Lee Freedman trained horse was ridden by Stephen King and paid $3.50 and $1.40, $5.60 for Artistic Rose and Kachina returning $32.20, and that helped boost the trifecta to more than $5,000. The 1200 metre Goodwood Handicap was race 7. And it survived a protest from the runner-up before paying $21.90 and $6.50 for the win. Another excuse, $8.40 and $1.80 for Clang. The trifecta, $2,936.90.
The ball comes loose and Brasher is with it. Non-opposition winner today is May 1.
It was good. Kamali turns it back on the inside again. Ross this time chipping into the in. 20-metre restart.
Thought Robbie Ross here, you can see him chipping over the top here, but on the left-hand side of the screen, just see there's only...
Now, cut-out pass. It comes wide through Hill. Ross stands up with it. Both Hinton and Jorgensen are there to wrap him up.
You don't have to be crazy to take part in a bash, but it certainly helps. A love of country music is also an added advantage. The only real criteria is that the car be at least 30 years old.
Cars have to be stock standard. They can be built up in terms of suspension. They can certainly look good on the outside, but the engines have to be stock standard because it's not a race, it's not a rally, it's a fun drive in the outback.
43 cars and crews are taking part in the 6th and biggest Newcastle Bash. Among the entrants, the car which started the whole Bash movement back in 1985.
Dick Smith had the car originally, and we've been lucky enough to be given the honour to drive it again.
The event aims to raise $100,000 for Variety Club children's charities. The Bash is not a race, or at least it's not supposed to be.
Someone would have a play, yeah.
The Bash was flagged away this morning, bound for a 2,500 kilometre trek through the outback, spreading its own brand of motoring mayhem. The Bash is due to arrive back in Newcastle on Saturday. Phil Hind, NBN News.
The political spotlight was shining brightly on Newcastle again today.
Shadow Minister for Industry Simon Crean, the newest driver of the BHP bandwagon. He met representatives of local business, unions and interest groups, just down the hall from where his opposite number held similar meetings yesterday. And just like John Moore, the promises are firm and the plans are vague. But there's one major difference. Simon Crean says the steelworks can be saved. He's called for a new national steel plan to replace the Labor Party program of the early 80s to help save the 2,500 jobs in Newcastle and thousands more around the country. The federal government has also been criticised for not doing enough to get Singleton's $200 million Red Bank power station off the ground.
It's said that future projects will be limited to road and rail, and therefore the Red Bank power station, which is not only economically smart but it's environmentally sound, is now at risk.
Meanwhile, the state government will continue its push for more jobs in the Hunter when state cabinet meets at Newcastle in August. The announcement follows Premier Bob Carr's launch of the Hunter Advantage Fund last week with a commitment of $10 million. Richard O'Leary, NBN News.
With the previous night's victory still fresh in their minds, the Boomers hit the court confident. Tony Ronaldson started the night on fire on his way to 18 points for the game. Croatia, keen to avenge defeat, took control early, opening up a 13-point lead midway through the first half. The ever-reliable Shane Heal got the Australians back in the game. And a timeout rev from coach Barry Barnes worked wonders, the Boomers bouncing back to be a point behind at half-time. The second half mirrored the first, Croatia taking it to the Boomers for a 7-point lead. Down but not out, the Boomers made every point count, converting 23 from 29 free throws. Some undisciplined play from the Croatians led to a tech foul, Andrew Gaze putting the Aussies ahead. The game came down to the last play, the Croatians fouling and Tony Jensen sinking the points and the Croatians in front of his home crowd. Coach Barry Barnes ecstatic with his charges.
We're very talented, but very experienced, and we're getting our nose in front when it matters.
Blake Doyle, NBN News.